Autumn Leaves by Wales Abbott. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Chad Horner from Ballyclare in County Antrim, Northern Ireland, situated in the northeast of the island of Ireland. Autumn Leaves by Wales Abbott. Chapter 16. The Old Sailor. In my school vacations I used occasionally to visit an old sailor friend, a man of uncommon natural gifts, and that varied experience of life, which does so much to supply the want of other means of education. He must have been a handsome man in his youth, and though time and hardship had done their utmost to make a ruin of his bold features, and had made it needful to braid his still jetty black locks together to cover his bald crown, he was a fine, striking head yet, to my boyish fancy. I loved to sit at his feet and hear him tell the events of 60 years of toil and danger, suffering and well-earned joy, as he leaned with both hands upon his stout staff, his body swaying with the earnestness of his speech. His labours and perils were now ended, and in his age and infirmity he had found a quiet haven. He had built a small house by the side of the home of his childhood, and his son, who followed his father's vocation, lived under the same roof. This son and 2 daughters were all that remained to him of a large family. An easterly bank and a westerly glim are certain signs of a wet skin, said the fisherman, pointing to the heavy black masses of cloud that hung over the eastern horizon. One morning when I had risen at sunrise for a day's fishing, "'Twon't do, don't go out today. There's soon such a breeze offshore as, with the heavy chop, would make you sick enough. Besides, the old dory won't put up with such a storm as is coming. No fishing, my boy, today." His old father said, "Stephen is right. There is a blow brewing," and he came to look, leaning on his cane. "Stay in today." I yielded, and the sky during the morning slowly assumed a dull, leaden hue. The storm came on in the afternoon, heavily pattering and pouring and blowing against the windows and obscuring the little light of an autumn twilight. I wandered through the few small rooms of the cottage, endeavouring to amuse myself while the light lasted, with 2 funeral sermons and an old newspaper. Then I sat down at a window, and I well remembered the gloomy landscape, seen through the rain in the dusk, the marsh with the creek dividing it, the bare round eminence between the house and the beach, or rather the rocky cliffs, and on either side the wide, lonely sands, with heavy foam-capped breakers rolling in upon the shore, with a sound like a solemn dirge. At a distance on the left, half hidden by the walnut trees, lay the ruins of a mill, which had always the air of being haunted. A high rocky hill, very nearly perpendicular on the side next the house, was covered on the sides and top with junipers, pines, and other evergreens. As the darkness thickened, I left the lonely best room for the seat in the large chimney corner in the kitchen. The old wife tottered round, making preparations for the evening meal, and muttered recollections of shipwrecks which the storm brought to her mind. Now and then she would go to a window, turn back her cap border from her forehead, put her face close to the glass, shading off the firelight with her hand, and gaze out into the darkness. Asa did not go out either, thank the good father, she said. The dog whined piteously. "Sit, sit, poor Skip. Here, shall have a piece. Good dog, a fearful night, indeed it is." The 2 men came in from the barn, shook off the wet, and drew near the fire. "Just such a night, 29 years ago, come August, we ran afoul of hatteras. You remember, old woman, how they frighted ye about me, don't ye?" Amidst such reminiscences we were called to supper. I remember being solemnly impressed when that old man, bent with hardship and the weight of years, clasped his hands fervently, and in rude terms, but full of meaning, asked a blessing upon their humble board. I remember the flickering light from the logs burning on the hearth, and how it showed upon the faces of those who sat there a strong feeling of the words in which rose an added petition in behalf of those on the mighty deep. Supper being ended, the old man took down the tobacco board, and when he had caught enough to fill his pipe, handed it to his son, who, having done the same, restored it to its nail in the chimney corner. Then they smoked and talked of dangers braved and overcome, of pirates and shipwrecks and escapes, till I involuntarily drew closer into my corner and looked over my shoulder. Suddenly the dog under the table gave a whining growl. "I never seed the like o' that dog," exclaimed the fisherman, turning to me. "I thought he was asleep, but if ever a foot comes nigh the house at night he gives notice. Depend on it, there's someone coming." The door of the little entry opened with a rush of the whistling wind, and a man stepped in. The dog half rose, and though he wagged his tail, in token that he knew the step to be that of a friend. He kept up a low whine. A young man, muffled to the eyes, and with the water dripping from his huge pea-jacket, opened the kitchen door. "William Crosby, why, what brings you out in such a storm as this? Strip off your coat and draw up to the fire, can't ye? Where are you bound then, and the night as dark as the wolf's throat?" The young fisherman made no answer unless by a motion of his hand, and as he turned back the colour from his face, he saw by the waving light that it was pale as death. The long wet locks already lay upon his cheeks, making them more ghastly as he struggled to speak. "Oh, Stephen Lee, there's no time to be sitting by the fire when old Asa Osborne is rolling in the waters. A man's drowned, and who's to get the body for the wife and the children, God pity them, afore the ebb carries it out to sea?" The old man drew his hand across his forehead and rose. I looked at him as he drew up his tall figure, and looked the young messenger full in the eye. In a low, deep whisper he said, "Who, William, did you say? You said a man's drowned, but tell me the name again." "Yes, grandsir, I did say it. Old Uncle As Fleming. He and the minister went out a-fishing in the morning. The minister got his boots off in the water, and after a long time he swum ashore. But poor Uncle As, Stephen, come along, his poor wife's gone down to the beach now." They left the house and shut the door after them, and came back softly to the seat by the old man's knee. Once before I had seen him, when a heavy sorrow fell upon him. It was on a beautiful summer's day, and the open window let in the cool breeze from the sea. He was sitting by it in his armchair, looking out upon the calm water, buried in thought. His favourite daughter had long been very low, and might sink away at any moment. The old dog was at his feet asleep. The clock ticked in the corner, and the sun was shining upon the floor. Some friends sat by in silence with sorrowful countenances. His little grandchild came to his side and said, "Mother says, tell Grandpa Aunt Lucy's gone home." The old man did not alter his position. For some time he sat in deep thought, looking out with unseeing gaze, and winding his thumbs as before. Of 5 fair daughters, 3 had before died by the same disease, consumption. He had seen them slowly fade away one by one, and had followed his children to the grave in the scheduled burying ground, where the green sod was now to be broken to receive the 4th. Rising slowly, he walked across the room, and, taking the well-worn family Bible, returned with it to his seat. And as he turned the leaves, he said in a low tone to himself, "There's only one left now." Then he sat entirely silent, with his eyes fixed upon the sacred page. He did not utter one word of lamentation. He did not shed a tear. But as he turned his eye on me in passing, its expression went to my heart. Stealing softly out, I left him to the silent Comforter, whose blessing is on the mourner. Now the scene was changed. One was suddenly taken from his side, who had been a companion from boyhood to old age. They had played and worked in company. Together they had embarked on their first voyage and their last, and they had settled down in close neighbourhood in the evening of their days. Each had preserved the other's life in some moment of peril, but took small praise to himself for so simple an act of duty. Few words of fondness had ever passed between them. They had gone along the path of life without perhaps being conscious of any peculiarly strong tie of friendship binding them together, till they were thus torn asunder. The death of a daughter, long and slowly wasting away before his eyes, could be calmly borne, but this blow was wholly unforeseen, and his chest heavily rose and fell, and by the bright firelight I saw tears rolling over his weather-beaten cheeks. A child will weep, a bramble smart, a maid to see her sparrow part, a stripling for a woman's heart. Talk not of grief till thou hast seen the hard-drawn tears of bearded men. The fury of the storm being abated, I resolved to follow Stephen down to the shore. He was not in sight, and I knew not what direction to take. It was a gloomy night, the transient glimpses of the moon between driving masses of clouds only making the scene more wild and appalling. I could see the tops of the tall trees bending under the fury of the blast, ere it came to sweep the beach. The heaving billows were covered with foam, far as the eye could see, and rising and tumbling seemed striving with each other as they rolled on towards the sands. I had seen storms upon the ocean before, but never had it presented so awful and majestic an appearance. As the breakers struck upon the shore, and sent a huge mass of water upon the sands, their sullen roar mingled with the howling and rushing of the wind, and filled me with awe. There were torches upon the beach, and as I drew near I saw the fishermen run together to one point. The body had just been washed ashore, and lay stretched upon the sands. The head was bare, and long locks of white hair streamed down upon the shoulders. The heavy pea-jacket was off from one arm, as if he had endeavoured to extricate himself from it in the water. The sinewy arms lay powerless and free from tension. Then Butley told me that when they first drew him from the surf, both hands were grasping a broken oar with such strength that they were unable to loose his hold, till suddenly the muscles relaxed and the arms fell upon the ground. They turned the body, and a little water ran from the mouth. Then gently raising it upon their shoulders, they bore it home. End of Chapter 16, The Old Sailor, by Wales Abbott.
How do you find this book? Any thoughts about the book or the author? Any suggestion for improvement? Please take a moment to share your thoughts in a comment. If you like it, share it with your friends who might enjoy it as well. Subscribe to keep in touch. Visit CompleteAudiobooks.com for more quality content.
The Decline of the Drama, by Stephen Leacock. From Modern Essays selected by Christopher Morley. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mary Windishar, WINDISHAR.com. The Decline of the Drama, by Stephen Leacock. Note: 1910 was an important year. Halley's Comet came along, and some predicted the end of the world. And Stephen Leacock's first humorous book, Literary Lapses, was published. First humorous book, I said, for Mr. Leacock, who is professor of political economy at McGill University, Montreal, had published his Elements of Political Science in 1906. It seems to me that I have heard that Literary Lapses was obscurely or privately published in Canada before 1910, that Mr. John Lane, the famous London publisher, was given a copy by someone as he got on a steamer to go home to England, that he read it on the voyage and cabled an offer for it as soon as he landed. This is very vague in my mind, but it sounds probable. At any rate, since that time, Professor Leacock's humorous volumes have appeared with gratifying regularity. Nonsense novels, Behind the Beyond, etc. And some more serious books, too, such as Essays and Literary Studies and The Unsolved Riddle of Social Justice. One of the unsolved riddles of social injustice is, why should Professor Leacock be so much more amusing than most people? We usually think of him as a Canadian, but he was born in England in 1869. The introduction was written by Christopher Morley. The Decline of the Drama. Coming up home the other night in my car, the Guy Street car, I heard a man who was hanging onto a strap say, "The drama is just turning into a bunch of talk." This set me thinking, and I was glad that it did, because I am being paid by this paper to think once a week, and it is wearing. Some days I never think from morning till night. This decline of the drama is a thing on which I feel deeply and bitterly, for I am, or I have been, something of an actor myself. I have only been in amateur work, I admit, but still I have played some mighty interesting parts. I have acted in Shakespeare as a citizen. I have been a fairy in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and I was once one end, choice of ends, of a camel in a pantomime. I have had other parts too, such as A Voice Speaks from Within, or A Noise is Heard Without, or A Bell Rings from Behind, and a lot of things like that. I played as a noise for 7 nights, before crowded houses where people were being turned away from the door, and I have been a groan, and a sigh, and a tumult, and once I was A Vision Passes Before the Sleeper. So when I talk of acting in the spirit of the drama, I speak of what I know. Naturally, too, I was brought into contact, very often into quite intimate personal contact, with some of the greatest actors of the day. I don't say it in any way of boasting, but merely because to those of us who love the stage, all dramatic souvenirs are interesting. I remember, for example, that when Wilson Barrett played the bat and had to wear the queer suit with the scales, it was I who put the glue on him. And I recall a conversation with Sir Henry Irving one night when he said to me, "Fetch me a glass of water, will you?" And I said, "Sir Henry, it is not only a pleasure to get it, but it is to me, as a humble devotee of the art that you have ennobled, a high privilege. I will go further." "Do," he said. Henry was like that, quick, sympathetic, what we call in French, vibrant. Forbes Robertson I shall never forget. He owes me 50 cents. And as for Martin Harvey, I simply cannot call him Sir John. We are such dear old friends. He never comes to this town without at once calling in my services to lend a hand in his production. No doubt everybody knows that splendid play in which he appears, called The Breed of the Treshams. There is a torture scene in it, a most gruesome thing. Harvey, as the hero, has to be tortured, not on the stage itself, but off the stage, in a little room at the side. You can hear him howling as he is tortured. Well, it was I who was torturing him. We are so used to working together that Harvey didn't want to let anybody do it but me. So naturally I am a keen friend and student of the drama, and I hate to think of it going all to pieces. The trouble with it is that it is becoming a mere mass of conversation and reflection. Nothing happens in it. The action is all going out of it, and there is nothing left but thought. When actors begin to think, it is time for a change. They are not fitted for it. Now, in my day, I mean when I was at the apogee of my reputation. I think that is the word. It may be apology. I forget. Things were very different. What we wanted was action, striking, climactic, catastrophic action, in which things not only happened, but happened suddenly, and all in a lump. And we always took care that the action happened in some place that was worthwhile, not simply in an ordinary room with ordinary furniture, the way it is in the new drama. The scene was laid in a lighthouse, top story, or in a madhouse, at midnight, or in a powerhouse, or a doghouse, or a bathhouse. In short, in some place with a distinct local color and atmosphere. I remember in the case of the first play I ever wrote, I write plays too, the manager to whom I submitted it asked me at once, the moment he glanced at it, "Where is the action of this laid?" "It is laid," I answered, "in the main sewer of a great city." "Good, good," he said. "Keep it there." In the case of another play, the manager said to me, "What are you doing for atmosphere?" "The opening act," I said, "is in a steam laundry." "Very good," he answered as he turned over the pages. "And have you brought in a condemned cell?" I told him that I had not. "That's rather unfortunate," he said, "because we are especially anxious to bring in a condemned cell. 3 of the big theaters have got them this season, and I think we ought to have it in. Can you do it?" "Yes," I said. "I can if it's wanted. I'll look through the cast, and no doubt I can find at least one of them that ought to be put to death." "Yes, yes," said the manager enthusiastically. "I'm sure you can." But I think of all the settings that we used, the lighthouse plays were the best. There is something about a lighthouse that you don't get in a modern drawing room. What it is, I don't know, but there's a difference. I always have liked a lighthouse play, and never have enjoyed acting so much, have never thrown myself into acting so deeply as in a play of that sort. There is something about a lighthouse, the way you see it in the earlier scenes, with the lantern shining out over the black waters, that suggests security, fidelity, faithfulness to a trust. The stage used generally to be dim in the first part of a lighthouse play, and you could see the huddled figures of the fishermen and their wives on the foreshore pointing out to the sea, the back of the stage. "See," one cried with his arm extended, "there is lightning in yon sky." I was the lightning, and that was my cue for it. "God help all the poor souls at sea tonight." Then a woman cried, "Look, look, a boat upon the reef." and as she said it, I had to rush round and work the boat to make it go up and down properly. Then there was more lightning, and someone screamed out, "Look! See! There's a woman in the boat!" There wasn't really. It was me. But in the darkness it was all the same. And of course the heroine herself couldn't be there yet, because she had to be downstairs getting dressed to be drowned. Then they all cried out, "Poor soul! She's doomed!" And all the fishermen ran up and down making a noise. Fishermen in those plays used to get fearfully excited, and what with the excitement and the darkness and the bright beams of the lighthouse falling on the wet oilskins, and the thundering of the sea upon the reef, me, those were plays. That was acting. And to think that there isn't a single streak of lightning in any play on the boards this year. And then, the kind of climax that a play like this used to have. The scene shifted right at the moment of the excitement, and lo, we are in the tower, the top story of the lighthouse, interior scene. All is still and quiet within, with the bright light of the reflectors flooding the little room, and the roar of the storm heard like muffled thunder outside. The lighthouse keeper trims his lamps. How firm and quiet and rugged he looks. The snows of 60 winters are on his head, but his eye is clear and his grip strong. Hear the howl of the wind as he opens the door and steps forth upon the iron balcony, 80 feet above the water, and peers out upon the storm. "God pity all the poor souls at sea," he says. They all say that. If you get used to it and get to like it, you want to hear it said, no matter how often they say it. The waves raged beneath him. I threw it at him, really, but the effect was wonderful. And then, as he comes in from the storm to the still room, the climax breaks. A man staggers into the room in oilskins, drenched, wet, breathless. They all staggered in these plays, and in the new drama they walk, and the effect is feebleness itself. He points to the sea. A boat! A boat upon the reef! With a woman in it! And the lighthouse keeper knows that it is his only daughter, the only one that he has, who is being cast to death upon the reef. Then comes the dilemma. They want him for the lifeboat. No one can take it through the surf but him. You know that because the other man says so himself. But if he goes out in the boat, then the great light will go out. Untended, it cannot live in the storm. And if it goes out, ask of the angry waves and the resounding rocks of what tonight's long toll of death must be without the light. I wish you could have seen it. You who only see the drawing-room plays of today. The scene where the lighthouse man draws himself up, calm and resolute, and says, "My place is here. God's will be done." And you know that as he says it and turns quietly to his lamps again, the boat is drifting, at that very moment, to the rocks. How did they save her? My dear sir, if you can ask that question, you little understand the drama as it was. Save her? No, of course they didn't save her. What we wanted in the old drama was reality and force, no matter how wild and tragic it might be. They did not save her. They found her the next day, in the concluding scene, all that was left of her when she was dashed upon the rocks. Her ribs were broken, her bottom boards had been smashed in, her gunwale was gone. In short, she was a wreck. The girl? Oh, yes, certainly they saved the girl. That kind of thing was always taken care of. You see, just as the lighthouse man said God's will be done, his eye fell on a long coil of rope hanging there. Providential, wasn't it? But then we were not ashamed to use Providence in the old drama. So he made a noose in it, and threw it over the balcony, and hauled the girl up on it. I used to hook her onto it every night. A rotten play? Oh, I'm sure it must have been. But somehow, those of us who were brought up on that sort of thing still sigh for it. End of the Decline of the Drama by Stephen Leacock, from Modern Essays selected by Christopher Morley. Recording by Mary Windishar, www.windishar, which is WINDISHAR.com.
Growing Old Gracefully by Robert Ingersoll. Coffee Break Collection 20, Old Age. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Colleen McMahon. Growing Old Gracefully. From The Blade, Toledo, Ohio, June 4th, 1891. Question. Have you acquired the art of growing old gracefully? Answer. It is very hard to live a great while without getting old, and it is hardly worthwhile to die just to keep young. It is claimed that people with certain incomes live longer than those who have to earn their bread. But the income people have a stupid kind of life, and though they may hang on a good many years, they can hardly be said to do much real living. The best you can say is not that they lived so many years, but that it took them so many years to die. Some people imagine that regular habits prolong life, but that depends somewhat on the habits. Only the other day I read an article written by a physician in which regular habits, good ones, were declared to be quite dangerous. Where life is perfectly regular, all the wear and tear comes on the same nerves, every blow falls on the same place. Variety, even in a bad direction, is a great relief. But living long has nothing to do with getting old gracefully. Good nature is a great enemy of wrinkles, and cheerfulness helps the complexion. If we could only keep from being annoyed at little things, it would add to the luxury of living. Great sorrows are few, and after all do not affect us as much as the many irritating almost nothings that attack from every side. The traveler is bothered more with dust than mountains. It is a great thing to have an object in life, something to work for and think for. If a man thinks only about himself, his own comfort, his own importance, he will not grow old gracefully. More and more his spirit, small and mean, will leave its impress on his face, and especially in his eyes. You look at him and feel that there is no jewel in the casket, that a shriveled soul is living in a tumble-down house. The body gets its grace from the mind. I suppose that we are all more or less responsible for our looks. Perhaps the thinker of great thoughts, the doer of noble deeds, molds his features in harmony with his life. Probably the best medicine, the greatest beautifier in the world, is to make somebody else happy. I have noticed that good mothers have faces as serene as a cloudless day in June, and the older the serener. It is a great thing to know the relative importance of things, and those who do get the most out of life. Those who take an interest in what they see and keep their minds busy are always young. The other day I met a blacksmith who has given much attention to geology and fossil remains. He told me how happy he was in his excursions. He was nearly 70 years old, and yet he had the enthusiasm of a boy. He said he had some very fine specimens, but, said he, nearly every night I dream of finding perfect ones. That man will keep young as long as he lives. As long as a man lives, he should study. Death alone has the right to dismiss the school. No man can get too much knowledge. In that, he can have all the avarice he wants, but he can get too much property. If the business men would stop when they got enough, they might have a chance to grow old gracefully. But the most of them go on until, like the old stage horse, stiff and lame, they drop dead in the road. The intelligent, the kind, the reasonably contented, the courageous, the self-poised, grow old gracefully. End of Growing Old Gracefully. Recording by Colleen McMahon.
A speech by Mark Twain. Coffee Break Collection 20, Old Age. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. How to be 70. We have no permanent habits until we are 40. Then they begin to harden. Presently they petrify. Then business begins. Since 40 I have been regular about going to bed and getting up, and that is one of the main things. I've made it a rule to go to bed when there wasn't anybody left to sit up with, and I've made it a rule to get up when I had to. This has resulted in an unswerving regularity of irregularity. It has saved me sound, but it would injure another person. In the matter of diet, which is another main thing, I have been persistently strict in sticking to the things which didn't agree with me until one or the other of us got the best of it. Until lately I got the best of it myself, but last spring I stopped frolicking with mince pie after midnight. Up to then I had always believed it wasn't loaded. And I wish to urge upon you this, which I think is wisdom, that if you find you can't make 70 by any but an uncomfortable road, don't you go. When they take off the Pullman and retire you to the rancid smoker, put on your things, count your checks, and get out at the first way station where there's a cemetery. I've made it a rule never to smoke more than 1 cigar at a time. I have no other restriction as regards smoking. I do not know just when I began to smoke. I only know that it was in my father's lifetime, and that I was discreet. He passed from this life early in 1847, when I was a shade past 11. Ever since then I have smoked publicly. Today it is all of 60 years since I began to smoke the limit. I've never bought cigars with life belts around them. I early found that these were too expensive for me. I have always bought cheap cigars, reasonably cheap at any rate. 60 years ago they cost me $4 a barrel, but my taste has improved latterly, and I pay $7 now. As for drinking, I have no rule about that. When the others drink, I like to help. Otherwise I remain dry, by habit and preference. This dryness does not hurt me, but it could easily hurt you, because you are different. You let it alone. I've never taken any exercise except sleeping and resting, and I never intend to take any. Exercise is loathsome, and it cannot be any benefit when you are tired. I was always tired, but let another person try my way and see where he will come out. I desire now to repeat and emphasize that maxim. You can't reach old age by another man's road. My habits protect my life, but they would assassinate you. End of How to Be 70.
To Madame Brillant, The Ephemera, an Emblem of Human Life, by Benjamin Franklin. Coffee Break Collection 20, Old Age. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. You may remember, my dear friend, that when we lately spent that happy day in the delightful garden and sweet society of the Moulin Joly, I stopped a little in one of our walks and stayed some time behind the company. We had been shown numberless skeletons of a kind of little fly called an ephemera, whose successive generations, we were told, were bred and expired within the day. I happened to see a living company of them on a leaf, who appeared to be engaged in conversation. You know, I understand all the inferior animal tongues. My too great application to the study of them is the best excuse I can give for the little progress I have made in your charming language. I listened through curiosity to the discourse of these little creatures, but as they, in their national vivacity, spoke 3 or 4 together, I could make but little of their conversation. I found, however, by some broken expressions that I heard now and then, they were disputing warmly on the merit of two foreign musicians, one a cousin, the other a mosquito, in which dispute they spent their time, seemingly as regardless of the shortness of life as if they had been sure of living a month. Happy people, thought I, you live certainly under a wise, just, and mild government, since you have no public grievances to complain of, nor any subject of contention, but the perfections or imperfections of foreign music. I turned my head from them to an old grey-headed one, who was single on another leaf, and talking to himself. Being amused with his soliloquy, I put it down in writing, in hopes it will likewise amuse her to whom I am so much indebted for the most pleasing of all amusements, her delicious company and heavenly harmony.
It was, says he, the opinion of learned philosophers of our race, who lived and flourished long before my time, that this vast world, the Moulin Joly, could not itself subsist more than 18 hours, and I think there was some foundation for that opinion, since by the apparent motion of the great luminary that gives life to all nature, and which in my time has evidently declined considerably towards the ocean at the end of the earth, it must then finish its course, be extinguished in the waters that surround us, and leave the world in cold and darkness, necessarily producing universal death and destruction. I have lived 7 of those hours, a great age, being no less than 420 minutes of time. How very few of us continue so long. I have seen generations born, flourish, and expire. My present friends are the children and grandchildren of the friends of my youth, who are now, alas, no more. And I must soon follow them, for by the course of nature, though still in health, I cannot expect to live above 7 or 8 minutes longer. What now avails all my toil and labor in amassing honeydew on this leaf, which I cannot live to enjoy? What the political struggles I have been engaged in for the good of my compatriot inhabitants of this bush, or my philosophical studies for the benefit of our race in general? For in politics, what can laws do without morals? Our present race of ephemera will in a course of minutes become corrupt, like those of other and older bushes, and consequently as wretched. And in philosophy, how small our progress! Alas, art is long, and life is short. My friends would comfort me with the idea of a name, they say, I shall leave behind me, and they tell me I have lived long enough to nature and to glory. But what will fame be to an ephemera who no longer exists? And what will become of all history in the 18th hour, when the world itself, even the whole Moulin Joly, shall come to its end and be buried in universal ruin?
To me, after all my eager pursuits, no solid pleasures now remain, but the reflection of a long life spent in meaning well, the sensible conversation of a few good lady ephemera, and now and then a kind smile and a tune from the ever amiable Briand. B. Franklin.
End of To Madame Briand, the Ephemera,
An Emblem of Human Life. Read by Rick Rodstrom.
Of Youth and Age, from the Essays or Counsels, Civil and Moral, by Francis Bacon. Coffee Break Collection 20, Old Age. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. This recording by Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in July 2019. Of Youth and Age. A man that is young in years may be old in hours, if he have lost no time. But that happeneth rarely. Generally, youth is like the first cogitations, not so wise as the second. For there is a youth in thoughts, as well as in ages. And yet the invention of young men is more lively than that of old, and imaginations stream into their minds better, and as it were, more divinely. Natures that have much heat and great and violent desires and perturbations are not ripe for action till they have passed the meridian of their years, as it was with Julius Caesar and Septimius Severus, of the latter of whom it is said, Juventutem egrit erroribus, emo furoribus plenum. And yet he was the ablest emperor almost of all the list. But reposed natures may do well in youth, as it is seen in Augustus Caesar, Cosmus Duke of Florence, Gaston de Foix, and others. On the other side, heat and vivacity in age is an excellent composition for business. Young men are fitter to invent than to judge, fitter for execution than for counsel, and fitter for new projects than for settled business. For the experience of age in things that fall within the compass of it directeth them, but in new things abuseth them. The errors of young men are the ruin of business, but the errors of aged men amount but to this, that more might have been done, or sooner. Young men in the conduct and manage of actions embrace more than they can hold, stir more than they can quiet, fly to the end without consideration of the means and degrees, pursue some few principles which they have chanced upon absurdly, care not to innovate, which draws unknown inconveniences, use extreme remedies at first, and that which doubleth all errors will not acknowledge or retract them, like an unready horse that will neither stop nor turn. Men of age object too much, consult too long, adventure too little, repent too soon, and seldom drive business home to the full period, but content themselves with the mediocrity of success. Certainly it is good to compound employments of both, for that will be good for the present, because the virtues of either age may correct the defects of both, and good for succession, that young men may be learners, while men in age are actors, and lastly good for extern accidents, because authority followeth old men, and favor and popularity youth. But for the moral part, perhaps youth will have the preeminence, as age hath for the politic. A certain rabbin upon the text, your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams, inferreth that young men are admitted nearer to God than old, because vision is a clearer revelation than a dream. And certainly the more a man drinketh of the world, the more it intoxicateth, and age doth profit rather in the powers of understanding than in the virtues of the will and affections. There be some have an over-eager ripeness in their years, which fadeth betimes. These are, first, such as have brittle wits, the edge whereof is soon turned, such as was Hermogenes the rhetorician, whose books are exceedingly subtle, who afterwards waxed stupid. A second sort is of those that have some natural dispositions which have better grace in youth than in age, such as is a fluent and luxuriant speech, which becomes youth well, but not age, So Tully hath said of Hortensius, idam manibet neque idam decabat. The third is of such as take too high a strain at the first, and are magnanimous more than tract of years can uphold. As was Scipio Africanus, of whom Livy saith in effect, ultima primus cedebant. This ends Of Youth and Age by Francis Bacon.
Old Age by Unknown. Coffee Break Collection 20, Old Age. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Old Age, printed and sold by Samuel Wood and Sons at the Juvenile Bookstore in 1816. As manhood passes on, many and various are the scenes that present. As one day goes, another comes, and sometimes shows us dismal dooms. As time rolls on, new things we see, which seldom with us do agree. Though now and then's a pleasant day, 'tis long a coming, soon away. Wherefore the everlasting truth is good for aged and for youth. 'Tis good to fix their minds upon, for that will last when time is gone. Man's experience will teach him that this world is not the place of his rest, and that there is a better state, where pleasure unmixed with sorrow will be the lot of all those whose days have been spent in obedience to the will of their heavenly Father. After many toils and perils, with some mixture of pleasure and summer's heat and winter's cold, as year after year rolls rapidly away, which in a state of manhood seem to move with quicker succession than in the days of youth, old age at last arrives. Old age. Who is this that comes tottering along? His footsteps are feeble and slow. His beard is grown curling and long, and his head is turned white as snow. His dim eye is sunk in his head, and wrinkles deep furrow his brow. Animation and vigor are fled, and yield to infirmity now. Little stranger, his name is Old Age. His journey will shortly be o'er. He soon will leave life's busy stage to be torn by affliction no more. Little stranger, though healthy and strong, thou dost adversity brave. Like him thou must totter ere long. Like him thou must sink in the grave. Those limbs that so actively play, that face beaming pleasure and mirth, like his must drop into decay and moulder away in the earth. Then ere the dark season of night, when youth and its energies cease, O follow with zeal and delight those paths that are pleasure and peace. So triumph and hope shall be nigh, when failing and fainting thy breath still light a bright spark in thy eye, as it closes forever in death. As age advances, nature fails, step by step. The teeth decay, the hair turns white and falls off, leaving the head bald, the eyes become dim, and recourse is had to glasses to aid the failing sight. The visage changes, the once plump and ruddy cheek grows thin and pale, and the face is covered with wrinkles. The joints become stiff, the body bends downward, as it were, betokening its approach to the earth. The hands tremble, and pains and sickness attend. How happy are they who at this period, when the world is forsaking them, or rather they leaving the world, find on reflection that from a well-spent life, through the mercy and assistance of kind heaven, all is peace within, and that they can meet death, the king of terrors, with joy, and resign their souls to him that made them, and their bodies to the earth, in a blessed assurance of happy eternity. End of Old Age.
Old Age Insurance in Germany by Abraham Epstein. Coffee Break Collection 20, Old Age. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Old Age Insurance in Germany. Germany was a pioneer in the field of social insurance. Insurance against old age was first established in that country in 1889. In 1911, Germany adopted a most comprehensive system of working men's insurance, which included, besides the payment of old age pensions, sickness, accident, invalidity, and survivors' benefits. Under the German law, insurance was made compulsory for all manual workers and those other wage and salaried persons whose annual income did not exceed 2,000 marks, normally $476. The obligation to insure begins with the 17th year. Prior to 1916, the age of eligibility for an old age pension was set at 70 years. An imperial law of June 12, 1916, reduced this age from 70 to 65. This law was made retroactive, taking effect as from the 1st of January, 1916. In addition to the payment of old age pensions, the German system also provides for invalidity pensions, which are granted in case of permanent disability before the pensionable age. The latter is given to all persons unable to earn 1/3 of the normal wages in the same occupation and locality. As would be expected, many more persons are receiving invalidity than old age pensions. The former has steadfastly increased, while the latter has steadily declined. In 1914, there were 998,339 invalidity pensions paid, as compared with 87,261 old age pensions. The comparative growth and decline of the two forms of pensions may be seen from the following. In 1891, there were 31 invalidity pensions. This increased to 405,335 in 1900. In 1908, it rose to 868,086, and in 1914 it numbered 998,339. The aggregate expenditures for the old age and invalidity pensions stood at 1-2 in 1894. It reversed to 2-1 in 1900, 8-1 in 1908, and 11-1 in 1912. The reduction of the pensionable age from 70 to 65 reduced this proportion considerably. The consequences for this reduction for the first complete year during which it was enforced may be seen from the following. The number of new pensions granted by the insurance offices of the various states increased from 11,276 in 1915 to 92,120 in 1916. Those granted by other offices of a special nature rose tenfold in the same interval. The insurance contributions in Germany are made jointly by the state, the employers, and the employees. The state bears part of the expenses of administration by the payment of pensions through the post offices, and contributes in addition a fixed sum each year toward every pension. The amounts of the weekly premiums that are paid by the employers and employees are in equal parts. The employer is made responsible for the insurance of all his employees and for the payment of their premiums. He is permitted to deduct the latter's contributions from their wages, and receipts it by affixing special stamps to the worker's receipt card. The contributions to the fund are not uniform, but vary in accordance with the annual earnings of the workers. For this purpose, the insured persons were divided until recently into 5 classes, ranging from those earning less than 350 marks, $83.37 per year in the first class, to those earning more than 1,150 marks, $273.93 per year in the fifth class. Until 1917, the weekly contribution of those classes ranged from 16 pfennig (0.038 cents) to 48 pfennig (0.114 cents) per week. On January 1, 1917, however, owing to the extra sums expended as a result of the reduction of the age limit, the contributions were increased to 18 pfennig per week for the first class and 50 pfennig per week for the highest group. Another amendment was adopted in April 1920. The new law increased the weekly contributions from 90 to 140 pfennig, respectively, normally (0.2104 cents and (0.3303 cents). This enormous increase in the weekly contributions since the beginning of the war is, of course, explained by the depreciation of the German money. Participants in the war were exempted from payments during the war. In July 23, 1921, a new law was adopted, increasing the classes to 8 and the weekly payments from 3.50 marks for the lowest class to 12 marks for the highest. It is further provided that this law continue in effect until December 1926. The German law provides that in order to be eligible for an old age pension, one must have at least 1,200 weekly contributions. To meet the immediate problem of old age relief, the required number of contributions was reduced by 40 weeks for each year of age over 40 at the time the law became operative. Persons over 70 years of age at the time of the passage of the law were thus pensioned outright, but they had to show that they had worked in a trade coming under the insurance law for 3 years. End of old age insurance in Germany. Old age insurance in Russia by Abraham Epstein. Coffee Break Collection 20, Old Age. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Old Age Insurance in Russia. Prior to the 1917 revolution, there was no general provision for invalidity and old age insurance in Russia. The only class protected against old age were certain groups of government employees under separate funds. However, as the Tsar's government controlled a great many industries, these government employees constituted a considerable number. An old age pension fund granting pensions after 25 years of service to employees of state mines was established as early as 1797. In 1804, this was extended to all employees of government factories. The Miners' Fund paid pensions after 35 years of service and required all over 18 years of age engaged for at least 1 year in the work to become members of the fund. The Railroad Employees' Pension Fund required all employees of state and private railroads to insure themselves. A pension was paid after 15 years of service. A similar fund existed for the employees of the state liquor monopoly. A separate savings fund for old age also existed for the workers of factories and harbor workers operated by the Ministry of Marine. Another fund against old age was operated by members of the volunteer fleet. A compulsory contributory pension fund was also established for all employees of the Zemstvo. Practically all these funds were controlled by members of the particular funds. In 1914, the government's contribution to these funds amounted to 117,994 rubles, normally $60,694. According to the meager available information, a decree published by the Russian Soviet government on March 8, 1918, established a complete scheme of government protection against sickness, invalidity, old age, unemployment, etc. Pensions are given to workers having served at least 5 years in their enterprise and who have lost their working capacity and have no other resources beyond the product of their own labor. The amount of the pension in case of complete disability is equal to the full wages received. In unhealthful industries, a pension is given regardless of length of service. End of old age insurance in Russia.
The 7 Ages of Man by Bergengren. Coffee Break Collection 20, Old Age. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Chad Horner from Ballyclare in County Antrim, Northern Ireland, situated in the northeast of the island of Ireland. The 7 Ages of Man by Bergengren. Chapter 7. The old, very old man. Now concerning the soul, it is a queer thing, considering that it lives in the body, yet dieth not. And so I conclude that the soul was made separate, and this body for its brief use and tenement. And how it gets in and gets out, I cannot tell you. And belike there be all sorts and conditions of souls, some good, some bad, some so-so. But because good is better than evil, and alike to start, and because they live in eternity, the bad souls will find it out in time and become good, and the so-so souls will learn wisdom and cease of their foolishness. But why they are not all made alike to start, that I cannot tell you, nor just how they was made. The Sage's Own Book. It was a poetess, I am glad to say, and not a poet, who wrote the once popular lines: "Backward, flow backward, O tide of the years, I am so weary of toil and of tears, toil without recompense, tears all in vain, take them and give me my childhood again." Many a voice, no doubt, sagged under this load of pathos as it read, "Rock me to sleep, mother," to a little group of sympathetic listeners. But if such melancholies are to be set on paper and circulated in print, I am unchivalrous enough to wish that joyless occupation on the gentler sex. Most of us perform prodigies of toil which seem to receive scant recompense, and shed figuratively many a bucket of seemingly useless tears. But I do not imagine that this sad poetess was half as badly off as she seemed to think, and more than that, she had only to wait long enough and keep alive long enough to get her childhood back without asking for it. Time, the grocery man, in due season, would hand her a second childhood in many respects just as good as the first, for we who are betwixt and between can observe an unintelligent ignorance of later troubles in one condition, neatly balanced in an unintelligent forgetfulness of them in the other. Our lugubrious poetess, one might say, was neither more or less than asking the tide of the years obligingly to assist her to commit suicide. Had her request been granted, there would have been one more child in the world and one less poetess. An impressive parallel may, indeed, be drawn between these two childhoods. The first a period of dependence upon its elders, and the second of dependence upon its youngers, and each, to the reflective observer, a pretty neat, evenly balanced reversal of the other. It is as if, in the beginning, the whole family of recognizable human characteristics, curiosity, memory, affection, dislike, ambition, love, hate, good nature, bad temper, and all the rest of them, were moving one after another into a new house, and as if in the end the whole family, one after another, were leaving an old one. The very youngest and the very oldest men in the world seem equally equipped for living in it, sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. And baby, a little older, when he goes out in his perambulator is much like ancient Thomas Power being conveyed to London as a human curiosity in a litter and 2 horses, for the more easy carriage of a man so enfeebled and worn by age, and to cheer up the old man and make him merry. There was an antique-faced fellow called Jack or John the Fool. Why, I myself, meeting a baby in a perambulator, have made such antic faces that I might fairly have been called Jack or John the Fool, or anybody who saw me, and all to cheer up the young man and make him merry. A little older yet, the child will run and play, rolling his hoop, spinning his top, enjoying the excitement of tag and hide-and-go-seek. And I dare say that the old man, a little younger than before, would be just as happy with hoop and top if he were again introduced to them, and would have a grand good time at tag and hide-y-go if he had other old men and old women to play with, and his youngers would let him. I do not mean that he would do any of these things as well as the child, but it would please him as much to do them to the top of his aged bent, though now and then a flicker of remembered convention, which the child has never known and considered, would make him self-consciously abandon these simple pleasures, even as an old cat caught trying to catch its tail, and sit up with dignity and pretend that it wasn't. There was once a custom of including a skeleton, or perhaps a mummy, in the festivity of a banquet, to remind the diners of their mortality, and, for all I know, the after-dinner speakers of the shortness of time, though very likely they soon got used to their silent companion, and took their mortality as lightly as most people do at dinner. An old, very old man, as a contemporary writer called the unpicturesque human ruin I have just referred to, would, it seems to me, have answered the same purpose, and answered it better. Human nature takes neither the skeleton nor the mummy with continuous seriousness, and proves by its attitude that, if we instinctively fear death at one moment, we instinctively ridicule our fear at another. I have read it argued that man with his clothes on is nevertheless naked. Such arguments seem to amuse philosophers, and by the same entertaining process of reasoning we are all skeletons together, though some may worry lest others consider them too fat for romantic admiration. Or again, to the man who believes that death snuffs him out like a candle, this skeleton at the feast might easily become an urgent reminder that he is still living, and he would most unwisely stuff himself out like a toy balloon while he still had a chance. But your old, very old man is a reality. He is both dead and alive. His presence, to say nothing of his table manners, should tend to make each guest regard death as a friend rather than an enemy. And his state of mind and body proves such a warning against pride in either, that even the after-dinner speakers would take notice and modestly shorten their speeches. Let it not be imagined that I lack respect for age. I tell you frankly, aging and respected reader, that so long as you can intelligently read even this essay, you are not seriously old, and when you cannot, you won't know the difference, and no respect of mine will be of any value to you. Your time has not come to sit propped up at table as the latest modern improvement on the skeleton at the feast. If ever it does, you, my friend, will not be there. Where you will be, I cannot faintly imagine, and neither churchmen nor philosophers help me, for the churchmen are too objective and the philosophers too abstract. The best I can do is to take John Fiske's words for it, who knew far more about both science and metaphysics than I can hope to, when he says the materialistic theory that the life of the soul ends when the life of the body is perhaps the most colossal instance of baseless assumption that is known to the history of philosophy. But when its house has become a ruin, my soul will certainly have sense enough to look for something more habitable, and may conceivably depart while there are still a few embers burning in the furnace, leaving the fire to die out when it will. Man is a conventional being, and perhaps his most astonishing convention is a funeral. But the custom has long gone out of thus poignantly reminding diners that a time is coming when they will have no stomachs, and old, very old men will get no invitations out to dine for any suggestion of mine. Fortunately, there are other uses for them. They are, for example, a source of innocent pride to their families. Grandpa was 89 his last birthday, and he still has a tooth. They interest the million readers of the morning paper, Friends from far and near gathered yesterday to celebrate the 101st birthday of Mr. John Doe, 17 Jones Avenue, the venerable patriarch who can still walk unaided from his place of honour by the steam radiator to his cushioned chair in the dining room, when asked to what he attributes his ripe old age, replied with astonishing intelligence that the winters are longer than they used to be. Mr. Doe was surrounded by 247 living children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren. These are visible uses, but this very old man may have invisibly a more important function, and the helplessness of age, like that of infancy, may well have been a necessary factor in the slow conversion of our ape-like ancestors into you and me. I have commented elsewhere on the natural astonishment of the first parents who realized, with their inefficient prehistoric minds, that this baby belonged to them, and how, in the considered opinion of able scientists, the little hitherto missing link joined father and mother into the first human family. Tending and providing for baby made the cave a home. But I suspect it was a long time before tending and proving for Grandpa added another motive for the cultivation of those higher qualities that distinguish man from all other animals. Why, there were savages who ate him, yet in due time the very old man became such a motive, and today man is the only animal that takes care of its grandfather. When you think of the differences between men today and men then, between men then and the ape men before them, and between men now as they go about their various occupations, it seems quite possible that ape men had no souls at all, and that some men today have rudimentary ones, millions of years behind others in evolution. It explains much. And so, wherever there is an very old man, I dare say the care his youngsters take of him is doing them good. They might even reverse the parental platitude of punishment and say, "Grandpa, this does me more good than it does you." But this proud possession of an very old man does not always work visibly toward such beneficent ends. His obstreperous infancy, masquerading in mature garments, sometimes exhausts the patience of his youngsters, and his permanent conviction, often the only sign of intelligence left, that he knows more than they do, and perhaps more than anybody else, makes their task difficult. It is one thing, so to speak, to take care of a baby when it is growing up, and another thing to take care of a baby when it is growing down. Then indeed one needs the assurance of immortality, the conviction that Grandpa is, little as one might think it, still growing up, and that this simulacrum of Grandpa that still remains to be looked after must not be taken too seriously. These very old men are not all just alike. There are Grandpas whom anybody might be proud to take care of, and Grandpas whom anybody might be excused for wishing, as the brisk modern phrase has it, to sidestep. And the explanation of this diversity, as of much else that puzzles us in a puzzling world, may be that they were not all just alike when they were babies. Inside their thin and tiny skulls, some had better brains than others, brains with more of those wonderful little pyramidal neurons, which able scientists, unless I get their message twisted, tell me correlate, connect, assemble and unite our individual ideas, memories, sensations and intellectual and emotional whatnots. Men, in short, may be born free, but they are not born equal. But why worry? If the individual soul is still young, it will keep on growing in wisdom and experience, nor will it lose touch with other souls that are akin to it, and in the measurement of eternity its contemporaries, and it will have a better and better house to live in, and ever more modern improvements in the way of pyramidal neurons, as the March Hare conclusively replied to Alice when she asked why the three little sisters who lived in the treacle well learned to draw by drawing everything that began with an M. Why not? So if ever I become like the valetudinarians described by Macaulay, who took great pleasure in being wheeled along his terrace, who relished in boiled chicken and his weak wine and water, and who enjoyed a hearty laugh over the Queen of Navarre's tales, I hope that somebody will considerately push my chariot, boil me an occasional chicken, and keep handy my spectacles and the Queen of Navarre's mirth-provokers. The weak wine and water I shall have to do without, but my soul, I like to think, which is the me for work and play, love, friendship, and all the finer things of life, already will have closed the door of its house and gone away, and as it goes, I like to think also that it whistles cheerfully a little tune of its own, the burden of which is "Life is long." End of chapter 7. The old, very old man.
Our Oldest Two Inhabitants, Two of Them, by Josh Billings. Coffee Break Collection 20, Old Age. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Our Oldest Two Inhabitants, Two of Them. John Bascom. John Bascom is now living in Coon Hollow, Raccoon County, state of Iowa. He is 196 years old and can read fine print by moonlight 33 feet off. He remembers George Washington first rate and once lent him $10 to buy a pair of calfskin boots with. He fit in the Revolution, also in the War of 1812, likewise in the late Melee, and says he won't take sass now from any man living. He is a hard-shell Baptist by religion, and says he will die for his religion. He was converted 150 years ago and thinks the hard shell is the toughest religion there is for everyday wear. He says that one hard-shell Baptist can do more hard work on the same victuals during a hot day than 15 Episcopalites. He has always used plug tobacco from a child and says he learnt how to chew by watching a cow chew her cud. He has never drunk any intoxicating liquor but whiskey and says that no other liquor is healthy. He thinks 3 horn a day is enough for health. He has always voted the Democratic ticket for the last 170 years and walked last fall in sloppy weather 18 miles to vote for Jim Buchanan. He ain't seen a railroad yet, nor a women's right convention. His greatest desire, he tells me, is to see General Jackson, and says that he shall go next year down to Tennessee to see him. He fatted a hog last year with his own hands that weighed 636 pounds after it was dressed and well dried out. He is very cheerful and says he won $7 on the weight of this hog out of one of the deacons of the Hardshell Church. He declares this to be one of the proudest accidents of his life, for the deacon was known far and near as a tight cuss. He tells me that for 90 years he has went to bed at just 17 minutes after 9 and has arisen at precisely 5 o'clock the next day. The first thing he does in the morning is to take a short drink, about 2 inches, and then for an hour before breakfast he reads the almanacs. I will here state that it is Josh Billings' Farmer's Almanacs that he reads. I asked him his opinion of gin and milk as a fertilizer. He pronounced it bogus and said that the good old hard-shell drink, whiskey unadorned, was the only spirits that never went back on a man. His habits are simple. For breakfast he generally ate 4 slices of salt pork, 3 boiled potatoes, a couple of sausages, 5 hot biscuits, a dozen of hard-boiled eggs, 2 cups of rye coffee, a small plate of slapjacks, some few pickles and cold cabbage and vinegar, if there was any left from yesterday's dinner. His dinner was always a light one, and he seldom ate anything but some boiled mutton, some corned beef, some cold ham, and some Injun pudding to top off with. His suppers were mere nothing, and consisted simply of cold salt pork, cold corned beef, cold boiled mutton, and once in a great while a few slices of cold ham, with mustard and horseradish. I examined his head and found that he had all the usual bumps in a remarkable state of preservation. He has a good ear for music and whistled me Yankee Doodle. with variations. He was born a shoemaker, but hasn't done anything at the trade for the last 125 years. He enjoys the best of health, but just now he is teething, which he tells me is his 7th set. He is a firm believer in the Darwin theory and says he used to hear his great-grandfather tell of a race of men somewhere down on the coast of Florida who had some little of the caudal appendix still remaining. On the subject of marriage, his head seems to be dead level. He said that he had been married 15 times and proposed again to Hannah Campbell, a lady in the neighborhood, who was 28 years old. I asked him what he thought his chances were for obtaining the lady's hand, and he said it lay between him and one Theodorus Whitney, a traveling corn doctor, and added if Whitney don't look out, he would enlarge his head for him. Upon me asking him what he attributed his immense life and vigor to, he said in a clear and distinct voice, to 3 small horns of whiskey a day, believing in the hard-shell doctrine, and voting unanimously the Democratic ticket. I thanked him very much for the information he had given me of himself, and asked him if he had any objection to me putting it into print, and he manifested a great desire that I should do so, not forgetting to make special mention of what he said about enlarging Whitney's head for him, for he thought that would clear him out of the neighborhood. I left John Bascom after a delightful visit of 4 hours, and thought over to myself if there was any 2 rules for long life that had been thus far discovered that was alike. The more I thought of this, the more I wished I could come across Methuselah for a few minutes and hear him tell how he managed. Elizabeth Meacham. Lib Meacham, as she is familiarly called in the township where she resides, is one of the rarest gems of extenuated mortality that has been my blessed luck to encounter. She is not so old as Bascom by about 2 years, being only about 194 years old. Next to Lot's wife, she is the best preserved woman the world contains. I reached her place of residence early in the morning, and in 1 minute after I told her my business, her tongue had a full head of steam on, and for 3 hours it run like a stream of quicksilver down an ink-lined plane. I asked her 1,000 questions at least, but not one of them did she answer, but kept talking all the time faster than Pocahontas can pace downhill to Saddle. As near as I could find out, she had lived 194 years simply because she couldn't die without cutting short one of her stories. I asked her to show me her tongue. I wanted to see if that member was badly worn, but she couldn't stop it long enough to show it. This woman has reached her enormous age without any particular habit. She has outlived everybody she has come across so far by out-talking them. The only subject that I could for a moment arrest the flood of her language with was the fashions, but that was a subject upon which I unfortunately wasn't much. As a last hope of drawing her out upon some facts and to her mode of life, I touched upon that all-absorbing topic to both old and young. I refer now to matrimony. Her first husband, it seemed, was a carpenter, and to use her own words, was too lazy to talk or to listen while she talked, and so he died. Her second husband was a pretty good talker, but a poor listener, and therefore he died. Her third husband was a deaf and dumb man, and as she remarked, either he or she had got to die, and the man died. Her fourth husband undertook to out-talk her and died early. In this way she went on describing her husbands, 12 in all. As I rose to depart, I said to her solemnly, "Elizabeth Meacham, you have been much married and much an inconsolate widder. At what time of life do you think the married state ceases to be preferable?" She replied, "You must ask somebody older than I am." and of our oldest inhabitants, 2 of them, by Josh Billings.
The Old Lovers by Kenneth Rand. Coffee Break Collection 20. Old Age. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Old Lovers. We meet in a sorrowful land that is hard by the gates of death. A smile and a touch of the hand, as the sunset's flaming brand flickers and fails in the west with the day wind's dying breath. 'Tis the most we may dare and best. They say that the passion is cold, that the flame is dead in the heart. Good friends that have loved of old, once more in the sunset gold, meet with a clasp of the hand, nod and dream and depart. Ah, love, 'tis a sorrowful land. I that have walked in a cloud, you that have wept in the sun, wrinkled and wearied and bowed, cover the wound, be proud, laugh, be it hell the while, that the world, ere the hell be done, may watch with a kindly smile. End of The Old Lovers.
Old Timers by Sandburg. Coffee Break Collection 20. Old Age. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Cornel Nemes in Reno, Nevada. Old Timers. I am an ancient, reluctant conscript. On the soap wagons of Xerxes I was a cleaner of pans. On the march of Miltiades' phalanx I had a haft and head. I had a bristling, gleaming spear handle. Red-headed Caesar picked me for a teamster. He said, "Go to work, you Tuscan bastard. Rome calls for a man who can drive horses." The units of conquest led by Charles XII, the whirling, whimsical Napoleonic columns, they saw me one of the horseshoes. I trained the feet of a white horse. Bonaparte swept the night stars wet. Lincoln said, "Get into the game. Your nation takes you." And I drove a wagon and team, and I had my arm shot off at Spotsylvania Courthouse. I am an ancient, reluctant conscript. End of Old Timers.
Onset of Old Age by Sir Humphrey Rolleston. Coffee Break Collection 20, Old Age. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Betty B. Onset of Old Age. The onset of old age varies in different countries and, like the development of puberty, is accelerated by the high temperature of tropical countries. There is also considerable variation in families and individuals of the same race and country. Thus, while one man may be senile at 60 years of age, another is vigorous both in mind and body at 80. The inconstancy of onset depends on the various factors that may play a causal part. Old age may be a physiological involution, but too often is a pathological product. When the period of reproductive power, maturity, wanes, that of old age begins. In women, this is marked by the menopause, the age of 45 years being taken as the limit of fertility. But before this, even in the late 30s, the specter of fading attractiveness may upset the matron and lead to the irregularities of the dangerous age. For man, there is no such index, and the change is so insidious that most of us would expostulate at Stanley Hall's statement that old age in men begins in the early 40s and sooner in women, or less than halfway through the physiological lifetime of 100 years. According to Dante, 45 marks the termination of youth, and it seems generally agreed that as a rule, and everyone is entitled to consider himself as the exception, the gay bloom of 50 passes quickly away, and people get fat and infirm and all that. It has from analogy of the female sex been rather fancifully suggested that in man there occurs about the age of 50 a critical period, climacterium virile, due to changes in the sex glands, Mendel, or prostate, Rankin, but of this there is no proof. It recalls as a kind of echo the ancient conceptions of the grand climacterics at 49, a multiple of the number 7, 63, 7 times the magical number 9 of the Arabians, and 81, and the description in 1807 by Professor B. Waterhouse of Cambridge, Massachusetts, who in 1800 introduced Jennerian vaccination into America, of a kind of male molting between 43 and 50, and a worse one at 63, an idea expanded into the climacteric disease imagined in 1813 by Sir Henry Holland. There is indeed no doubt that after an illness, and the so-called climacteric disease admittedly seldom occurred without some previous factor, such as an attack of gout, a common cold, a bout of intemperance, recent marriage, or particularly grief or bereavement, old age may come on apace. In some instances, the so-called climacteric disease was perhaps really chronic renal disease, in others merely the prolonged or imperfect convalescence due to some lingering infection after an acute illness, such as influenza. And, as in the latter case, recovery may occur. Holland's contention that recovery was an argument in favor of the existence of this climacteric disease holds good only in distinguishing it from permanent senility, which indeed was the objection that he was concerned to meet. The conception of the climacteric disease is interesting historically only, and it may be agreed that apart from accidents of environment, the progress of senescence in healthy men is gradual and uneventful. So stealthy is the onset of senescence that commonly it is not recognized by its victim, and though he may seldom mention it, every man is firmly convinced that he not only looks but is at least 10 years less than the register would tell him. Though unconscious of the change in himself, he notes it with perhaps some self-congratulation in his contemporaries. It is only if he tests himself, for example by timing himself for a mile's walk, that a healthy man of say 70 years has it borne in on him that he is not what he was. The information that he is old may be suddenly conveyed by overhearing the chance remarks of others, by catching a reflection of his bent back in a mirror, by tardy recovery from illness, or the advent of some disability, such as hypertrophy of the prostate or dyspnea on holiday exertion. Perhaps the commonest warning is a feeling of fatigue. Sir Andrew Clark regarded the onset of old age as the period when a man ceased to adjust himself to his environment. But some persons never are able to do this, and misfits are not necessarily old. Laurentius divided old age, beginning at 50, into the 3 stages of the green, because it is accompanied with prudence, full of experience, and fit to gwern common weals. The second at 70 years is very cold and dry, and the last, without a specified age incidence, is that of decrepitude, corresponding to the famous description in the 12th chapter of Ecclesiastes. A more modern and comforting division is that of lacassagne, of pre-senility, old age beginning at 60 or sometimes 70 in men, and in women 10 to 15 years earlier, advanced old age, and lastly decrepitude. Nasher speaks of a senile climacteric about the latter part of the 7th or 8th decade, the transitional period between old age and decrepitude, corresponding to the changes at puberty and at the menopause. Precocious old age, due to the effects of disease, especially syphilis and acute infections, and to metabolic defects which permanently damage the cells of the body, has a special interest, as it supports Metchnikoff's pathological view that old age, as ordinarily seen, is a result of toxic injury. Vide page 82. Hastings Gilford has specially investigated premature senility, and under the title Progeria has described a remarkable condition of premature senility combined with, or secondary to, infantilism. This condition was independently described in 1910 by Verriot and Pirano as the senile type of nanism. In such cases, it would appear reasonable to ascribe these two opposite conditions to the same toxic or other factor, the infantilism depending more on damage to the ductless glands before development was complete, and the senile changes to direct injury of the cells in the body in general. End of Onset of Old Age.
The Raft-Builders by Lord Dunsany. Coffee Break Collection 20, Old Age. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording by Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in June 2019. The Raft-Builders. All we who write put me in mind of sailors hastily making rafts upon doomed ships. When we break up under the heavy years and go down into eternity with all that is ours, our thoughts, like small lost rafts, float on a while upon oblivion's sea. They will not carry much over those tides, our names and a phrase or two, and little else. They that write as a trade to please the whim of the day, they are like sailors that work at the rafts only to warm their hands and to distract their thoughts from their certain doom. Their rafts go all to pieces before the ship breaks up. See now oblivion shimmering all around us, its very tranquillity deadlier than tempest. How little all our keels have troubled it. Time in its deeps swims like a monstrous whale, and like a whale feeds on the littlest things, small tunes and little unskilled songs of the olden golden evenings, and anon turneth whale-like to overthrow whole ships. See now the wreckage of Babylon floating idly, and something there that once was Nineveh. Already their kings and queens are in the deeps, among the weedy masses of old centuries that hide the sodden bulk of sunken Tyre, and make a darkness round Persepolis. For the rest, I dimly see the forms of foundered ships upon the sea floor, strewn with crowns. Our ships were all unseaworthy from the first. There goes the raft that Homer made for Helen. End of The Raft-Builders by Lord Dunsany.
Stimulants, Narcotics, and Old Age by George Miller Beard, 1839 to 1883. Coffee Break Collection 20, Old Age. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Stimulants, Narcotics, and Old Age, published in 1883. Their effects vary with the age. The old bear them better than the young. Those who carefully study their own constitutions find that varieties and preparations of food, which at one time of life are beneficial, at others prove injurious. And all the world knows that the diet of infants and children must be radically different from that of adults, and that adults in turn must modify their habits of eating in extreme old age. Negative food, stimulants, and narcotics is much more variable in its effects at different periods of life than positive food, and hence there is need of greater caution in using it. Infants and children do not need stimulants and narcotics, and should not ordinarily be allowed even the weaker varieties. The young of both sexes, whose growth is not completed, are more liable to be harmed than benefited by a free indulgence of these substances, for these three important reasons. First, while the system is growing, it needs abundance of positive nutriment to supply the rapid changes of tissue, rather than negative, which lessens the appetite for other food. Secondly, their brains are much less actively employed than those of maturer age, and therefore have less need of the sustaining influence of stimulants and narcotics. And thirdly, there is great danger that they may acquire habits of overindulgence and become slaves to appetite, since at this time of life they have neither the full development of moral character nor yet the manifold restraining, diverting, and counteracting influences and duties that enable adults to use them in a wise and decorous moderation. The tendency with many parents, in this country certainly, is to allow their young children to form habits of using tea and coffee much too early, and the tendency with young men in every walk of life is to acquire the habit of smoking, chewing, and drinking strong liquors at a time when they have little need of these substances, and when they have not the moral force to resist their seductive and bewitching influences. I have long thought and frequently stated that if our young people would avoid the formation of habits of free indulgence in stimulants and narcotics until the growth is completed, a period which variously ranges between the age of 20 and 30, intemperance and most of the physical disease that results from these substances would in the course of the next generation be well nigh unknown. For habitual intemperance, like most other crimes, is usually the result of habits formed in youth. Especially beneficial in old age. On the other hand, some of these articles of which we have been speaking, which in youth are of such doubtful advantage, in the decline of life are as beneficial as they are grateful. By gently stimulating the jaded digestion, by giving tone to the exhausted brain, by equalizing the languid and unbalanced circulation, and by economizing the wasted tissues, they beneficially and efficiently sustain the system, when the desire for positive nutriment has long been blunted, and the forces of assimilation have well nigh lost their mysterious power. Thus they serve a most beneficial purpose to sweeten and prolong the evening twilight of existence, to make less perceptible the slow darkening of the lights in the windows, more gently and easy the sure descent into the depths of the dark unknown. Surprise is often expressed by individuals that as they advance in age, they can use with benefit or at least without injury substances which in their previous history they could not bear. Our bodies change continually without regard to age. They are changed by the weather, by our occupation and duties, by our joys and woes, by our diet and sleep, or the want of it, by the varied conditions of disease, by all that makes up our life. They are changed even when we are the least subject to external influences. The elaborate chemistry of the body never rests. I am not the same individual today that I was yesterday. Tomorrow I shall be different from what I am today. A month hence I shall be a new being. Thus, in the course of life, I personate numberless different and even opposite physical characters. A stimulant or narcotic, therefore, which I take today affects me very differently from what it did last year, because I am not the same person. Professor Huxley tells a story that when he was quite young he never could bear to smoke, and all attempts to do so left him on the floor of the room where he made the attempt. Recently, in middle life, he has tried it and finds in it enjoyment without apparent harm. There is a story of a Greek philosopher who vowed that he never would call in a doctor, but when he was sick he sent for one, and when he was reproached for his inconsistency he replied, "But I am not the same person that I was." Today I cannot take coffee without immediate and perceptible injury. 10 years hence I may indulge in it freely without harm. Time was perchance when tea kept me awake the whole night long, but now it seems rather to dispose me to slumber. You wonder that the cigar, in which you formerly indulged without discomfort, now excites a myriad unpleasant and harassing symptoms. That the glass of cider, which once caused you intense headache, now serves as a tonic and appetizer. To the rule that infants and children should abstain from stimulants and narcotics, there would appear to be some exceptions of race and climate and condition. For in some countries babies use wine and beer, and little children of both sexes smoke cigars, and the query is not raised whether they are or are not injured by so doing. End of Stimulants and Narcotics in Old Age.